Hey kids, it's Jurassic James, and on this Jurassic James Explains, we're looking at Dracorex, Stygimoloch, and Pachycephalosaurus. You're saying, why are you doing three species? It'll make sense in the end, but in general, I want you to know that I'm not going to go over everything in detail, because if you want a detailed Pachycephalosaurus video, I still have more up there to go over and review, but today I'm going to want a major topic. Now, for one thing I want to point out is that I realize you're like, James, we have a good thing going on. You post these videos, we enjoy them, we give you likes, but why would you bring up such a controversial thing? Well, I want to use it as an example to teach you guys how paleontology works. So I'll start off with Dracorex. So first of all, the name Dracorex means, the genus, genre, means Dragon King. And the species name is Hogwartsia. And Dr. Barker was on the team who, named it and wrote it, and he said it was on display in the museum. And the little boy who was a Harry Potter fan saw it and said it was like a dragon. So the name Dracorex Hogwartsia became what it was. So the first one I received was in 2008. This is a Collect A model. Now, of course, I've always mentioned the tails being too short. There's two things going on. First of all, the exception to the rule of two short tails are ceratopsians, and which we're trying to figure out where Pachycephalosaurus fit on the family tree of dinosaurs. They are thought to be closer to ceratopsians than hadrosaurs or the duckbills or the armored dinosaurs. Now, whether or not it had a short tail, we don't know, because we don't really find their postcranial, or the cranial is their head, post meaning behind, in this case, postcranial body. So we don't know for sure. But the main thing to point out, the features to point out, is that one, it has all these little buds right here, it has a relatively flat head, and it has these horns on the back. And people often call them the through, dome head dinosaurs, and there's no dome, and that's for a reason. For me, this one looks like a juvenile, which is ironic, because it's the round body, short tail. It's like as if it just hatched from an egg, or well, not just hatched. The horns are too sharp, but the idea is that it's very young, right? The next one I received was 2012. I believe Safari, if I'm correct. Safari, yeah, Safari. And this guy looks more realistic. I like the way this one, to me, is better. They both have 5 fingers, and that's because we think they had 5 fingers. They has no crest on top. It's just horns on the face. The overall build of it feels like a dinosaur goat. I don't know. I can't explain that, but I mean, I get goat vibes from this specimen. And of course, a long tail here. And I love the texture of the skin. From my understanding, we do not have any kind of Pachycephalosaurus skin impressions. If we do, let me know in a link. Put a link in the description. But the idea in general, in the comments section. But the idea in general is that it has, the 3 toes going forward, a dew claw going back. These are herbivores. I'm sorry. If you don't know, the Pachycephalosaurus are actually plain dinosaurs. The funny thing about that is people associate 2-legged meaning meat eater and 4-legged meaning plant eater. But of course, the duckbills can walk. Actually, they walk on 4 legs and they run on 2 legs. But most of the other herbivores are 4-legged, except for the Pachycephalosaurus. So that's why they're another kind of mystery there. I often didn't think about that fundamental idea. I was doing a tour at Dinosaur Park in Bastrop, and there was a Stegosaurus, a cousin, not Stegosaurus, Stegosaurus, cousin of this guy, and I just didn't mention his diet. And one of the moms was like, "What does it eat?" I'm like, "Oh, plants, sorry," because people just assume it's a carnivore. Jurassic World did their bit. Basically, they have this guy here, or should I say this gal, if it's Jurassic World. There's repaints, of course, but they have these horns here. Now, I have actually handled a cast of the skull. It's one of the few dinosaurs that I believe is copyrighted, but because Dr. Barker actually was on the team that named it and everything, he got a copy of it. So he was at the museum in Houston. I got to hold it and do stuff with it and look at it. But the idea is the horns weren't this big. But of course, that's the bony part. So maybe you add the keratin in life, and maybe it was that large, that long. But there's not very many specimens known with animals, so it's kind of a mystery there. Now, fast forward, you go to Jurassic World. Actually, before Jurassic World, this is my first Stygimoloch. This guy came in a Toys R Us, 5-pack, a little scenery, And what made it special was that it has a small dome. The horns are still there, whereas other packies have, they have just a big dome. And the hands look pretty decent. I mean, for what it is, it's standing upright really horribly, but I was excited and impressed when Jurassic World added this guy to their movie. Now, I'll just let you know that Stygimoloch does not have the ability skeletally to break through a cement wall. That behavior seen in the movie was obviously helping move the plot. That it was just ramming its head into the wall to get out, and that would damage anything. Like this guy, even if they did ram heads, they would ram them on other skulls, not cement cinder blocks. So cool thing, little dino damage there. Three tails in the front, dew claw on the side, the 5 finger and hands, and of course they have the mixture of the dome and these horns here, and of course they did a repaint that for some reason the neck goes like in and out, which I don't know. I guess it's the reason that it's ramming heads, whatever, but they don't do that. Their necks don't retract or anything. So the main event for this particular talk is Pachycephalosaurus. The earliest ones in figure form are these ones from the 80s, the dinosaur, like the kid-friendly ones. 5 fingers, three toes moving forward, no dew claw on the back. The main thing you're looking at is a large dome, a few horns on the face, and then these little nodule horns in the back of the skull. So the idea of them ramming heads came up pretty early in their discovery. We mainly find their skulls anyway, in partial skulls. You don't find the whole bodies with these guys. There's kind of a mystery there. But the idea is that they get like a football player and they run on a field and slam heads. And Dr. Blocker, and I was a kid in the 90s, and I remember there was a show called Paleo World. It was a really, really cool show. And they would, these two kids would talk to scientists and do interviews and stuff like that. And he was using football players as an analogy. And Dr. Blocker was suggesting that instead of running head to head, they may have run like head to gut or head to chest, because he took 2 bowling balls. And he was like, look, if you hit these together, they're going to slide past. And this is true. The bones in the skull aren't like super reinforced. So if enough strong enough force hit, it would be just like you getting hit really hard in the face, So that kind of changed our view of that. But the first, I would say, scientific model would be the Carnegie or Safari. Safari, 1990. And this guy, I initially don't like to buy the ones with the bases, but it's a biped, running in mid-attack, mid-ram head. But you're seeing the quintessential features: the 5 fingers on the hand, the 3 toes on the front, dew claw on the side, general length of the body, and then this dome with pebble-like horns around the side. That is persistent because Imperial, a company that when I was a kid I fell in love with, because most of the figures were smaller, and Imperial had these bigger figures and that matched my Jurassic World figures. All the same number of toes and fingers. Oh, no dew claw. Never mind. And when I say dew claw, I remind you on a dog, that's the 4 main paws and claws. And there's the one on the side called a dew claw. And the idea is think about it like if there was wet and the dew in the morning, like a drop would form off of that claw and to drip down. That's how I remember it in my head. But this guy has main points. Of course, it should be horizontal. It should not be like a man standing upright. But other than that, it's pretty decent. This guy, I can't say is terribly wrong because we have no skin to prove against it. But it's very pebbly skin like this one too. So they're continuing this general look for the animal. It's not changed much. In 1987, Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World came out, or The Lost World Jurassic Park came out. And this is my actual first Pachy toy. You push a button and the neck goes down and they ram heads, and 5 fingers in the hand, 3 toes on the front, dew claw on the side. The thing that concerned me in the movie was that it was too small. Pachy's are over 20 feet long. The adult Pachycephalosaurus are 20 feet long. So in the movie they were that tall, and they were like little sheep kind of thing, or goats. And they had that iconic, they caught it with the Humvee and all that. But Dr. Burke in the movie, who is loosely based on Dr. Blocker as a parody joke, was saying they have 9 inches of solid bone, and they were ramming, they hit a guy and he went through the car kind of thing. That's what they were suggesting, but I don't know if it's entirely true. The skulls are pretty thick, and it is believed that when they first found the first Pachy's, they saw these really thick skulls. They thought they were just very smart. They had huge brains. I will remind you that a human brain is 2% of your mass. It's not very heavy as an organ, but it's 20% or 1 in 5 of your energy intake. Your brain takes a lot of energy to power your brain, and so brains are very expensive to have. They're really important organ. Now, of course, they run your body, so they're very important organs. But the idea is that we don't see if intelligence was a super good trait in evolution, we would see it more often, and we see it in chimps and humans and dolphins, cetaceans. We don't see it very commonly. So for them to have large brains, it would be for a reason. And the idea that it turns out, no, you saw the bone in half, you see it's actually just a thick piece of bone. There was a little guy, and then the bigger ones were actually looking more realistic than the actual, animal. It has, where this one does that retract thing where you push it, which is cool for a toy gimmick because it makes the hoods of the cars of Jurassic World fall apart or come off. But overall, it wasn't any, they're all consistently what they are, which is interesting because a lot of the toys, as I showed you in previous videos, they change dramatically for time, and for the most part, they stick to the same body plan. Then there's like the mall 5-pack of toys. This one's dumb, so the horn's a little bit bigger. And of course, last but not least, the newest Jurassic World figure we have here, this guy, also a dino damage, same number of fingers and toes. Is that a Dewclaw? No Dewclaw, so it's just a 3 in the front. So, that being said, what's the point of this whole story while we're doing these videos, these animals together? Jack Horner has a theory, and his followers, not a cult, the students of his teaching, that dinosaurs, we don't find out as juveniles. And he's suggesting that Stygimoloch and Dracorex are juvenile or lower, of Pachycephalosaurus. And for those of you who want to be a paleontologist, you want to get your PhD, this is the kind of thinking you have to go for. It's one thing to learn everything, to memorize stuff, kids. That gets you a master's degree. You can memorize the stuff, you can write a paper about it. But a PhD, the philosophy level is you can look at what we know in science, and you can take it and say, I think this other view of things, So what's supporting evidence? First of all, they're all found at the exact same time. They're all Maastrichtian, very late Cretaceous animals, North America only. So the idea that they're in the same environment, the first assumption would be, just like in Africa today, we have impala, gazelles, they're all together in the same environment, and they're eating slightly different things or, different areas. So you would assume that here too. But his idea is that no, we don't find juveniles of Pachycephalosaurus or Stygimolochs. We only find these adults. He's saying maybe the Dracorex, these are the Jurassic World examples because they're simpler and newer and fun, I don't know. So what he's suggesting basically is this, that the Pachycephalosaurus that we all know and love is the adult form of these two. Now, here's what he's trying to say, is that the younger juveniles, adolescents, are Dracorex, and that there's no dome there. And the idea is animals, when they're young, they don't have the same features they use to get mates. The idea is that, you don't have a baby deer with huge antlers because their goal or purpose is to eat and survive, right? But when you get to a certain age, you can reproduce, you begin growing the huge antlers for the males, So the idea here is that there's no dome there because the dome must be used most likely for some kind of sexual display or competition, right? Interspecies combat. So the idea is that they just have the horns here for protection or something like that. As they get older, he's suggesting the horns begin to reduce somewhat in size and the dome begins to form. Kind of like a dinosaur puberty kind of thing, but not chemically focused. And then as they get even older, the horns reduce down and the dome gets bigger. And that tells your herd, your population, that you are old enough, you're an adult, and you're ready to reproduce. And now you can compete with your species. He's used the same idea with the T-Rex and Nanotyrannus, which is, again, I've said it in many videos before. It's a very hot topic that I will not touch with a 10-foot science stick. He said the same thing about Triceratops and Torosaurus, which to me that's a different video. I don't subscribe to that one as much. But the idea is that he used the data of looking at cross-section of the bones, and we know that when animals are growing, they're not as tightly packed as the adults. So with the Dracorex and the Stygimoloch, the bones are more loosely material. They get so packy, they're very tight. He's suggesting that too. What's interesting about this is everyone's interpretation of it. Now, the Torosaurus and Triceratops, the idea there is that Triceratops, like their bodies are bigger, the Torosaurus bodies. So you wouldn't get to adulthood and lose body mass, But with these guys, most people I hear from at least, or subscribe to it or accept it, it's out there. People are saying it's the theory now. And that's what PhD is for paleontology. That's when you are changing the view, looking at something and rearranging how we look at it. But there are diehard fans who are saying, no, these are different species. There'll be different parts of this environment, different niche partitioning. eat different foods, whatever. All plants, but different kind of plants maybe. So that's one thing that's being debated in paleontology. And I know when I teach a class or give a lecture or do these videos, it comes off very like we know this stuff, and we do know a lot. But what we don't usually tell you in lectures is what we don't know, or the edge of the I call the coastline of science, where we've learned and mapped this much out. There's still more being not looked into. So something like this, you say, how do you have a for sure? I mean, he has pretty good convincing evidence for this part of the theory, but the idea is that you have to find. I mean, if you found a baby Pachycephalosaurus, there you go. I do know that there is an animal called Micro-Pachycephalosaurus wyomingensis, which is thought to be its own species, but now we're saying it could be a juvenile of something else. So that could put, if that's truly a juvenile of Pachycephalosaurus, it would question and challenge the theory. So again, that's one of the things that's very frustrating. And I'll close with this example. When you watch Jurassic Park 1, I watched it with my mom recently, I say recently, years ago. I'm a geology person. Recent is not yesterday. She was pointing out the fact that Dr. Grant kept asking Tim, like, what dinosaur is that? What is this? And Tim was like, Gallimimus, And she was like, Dr. Grant doesn't really know anything. And that's one thing to point out, is that when you are a kid, you have the freedom to just learn and memorize. But when you're in a upper adult level, you don't just know dinosaurs. You have to know the before dinosaur stuff and after dinosaur stuff, and chemistry and physics, and sometimes the details of these things don't always retain or quickly to be drawn. So to look at the situation here, you're saying, well, why isn't it just one or the other? Which one is it? We don't know. It's still being debated and fought over. And again, it's a cop out to say just keep digging, but I say it all the time, because we have to find more evidence. Now, keep digging is not the best way of saying it, because you can go dig up new skeletons, but a lot of new discoveries are happening in museum collections, where people will go to a museum, look around these jackets that have been plastered and covered up from 30 years ago, 100 years ago, and they're cleaning through and they find a new species there, or what we thought was one species in the jacket, you find a new species. So there might already be the answer to this situation in some museum basement somewhere that just hasn't been prepped out or cleaned. But in general, I want to point out that with the story, whether you believe it or not, or accept it or not, that this is an interesting way of looking at things. The very simple question of, we find very few juvenile animals, where are they? Oh, they could be other species we've named, seems to make sense, because we know in early paleontology, the Bone Wars, for example, a lot of these guys were naming, well, not those two guys were just finding and naming stuff. We, for the most part, for the last century, have been fixing that, but still, that's a good point. Now, and of course, the argument against it is, well, of course, juveniles don't fossilize as well, because they are smaller and they're more delicate, and maybe they were not with the adults for a certain time, or maybe, So there's a lot of parts back and forth here, and that's what makes paleontology a continuing frontier, is that you're not just looking at something and saying, well, here's what it is, move on, but to someone to say, well, how do we know this is what it is, or how do we fit this evidence in it? That's why it's so cool. So again, not a normal video, but I wanted to go over this concept with you guys after I did my Alligramus video last week. So that being said, just keep that in mind and think about it, and put in your comments, requests, or whatever below. And thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it.